Lead balloons.
It's the alchemy of
Unpopular opinions. So,
Whoops, I have somewhere to be. There's actually bourbon in this, so everyone knows.
those things are very complicated and
I don't know that I actually believe what I'm about to say.
spreading lies.
This critical culture that we live in.
Just to try to be an asshole.
What's up, everyone? Welcome to our podcast, Lead Balloons, the alchemy of unpopular opinions. Jumping right into it, Trent. According to the most recent data, the U.S. is sixth. Did you know this? On the list of countries with the highest prison rates. Out of 100,000 people, 531 citizens are in prison. That's how they're kind of measuring it in terms of like rates. Now, the 5 countries that are above America are countries like Cuba and Rwanda, both with around 13, maybe as low as 11 million, some even way less. America has a population of 333 million, which is why the U.S. tops the charts with the most people imprisoned, counting our state, federal, county, local jails, include smaller percentages, smaller numbers, but detention centers, psychiatric hospitals, these are all people being held and locked up. Now, the United States has almost 2 million people in prison. Out of our 333 million, 2 million are imprisoned. And China, which has 4 times the population of America, 1.4 billion people, yet America has more people locked up than this supposedly oppressive government. So, Trent, we're touching on a lead balloon today here, right? A topic. And sure, we'll laugh and joke about it at times in this discussion, but it's a serious topic when we're talking about prisons. And it's personal, too, right? So I want to hand it off to you. Tell us why this is a personal topic for you.
Well, you and I have talked about this before, and I think we had both wanted to have this conversation. And obviously, this topic is personal to me. It makes me feel a little bit exposed because I have a dad who went to prison. And that's something that a lot of people haven't experienced, having a parent who went to prison. And so, so my dad went to prison, and I wanted to take some of this podcast to share that story. I think it's worth sharing. It is. It's worth sharing because I care about it, and I think these stories need to be told, especially within the larger context of the conversation about prisons in America and what we're doing and prison reform. So I wanted to share about it. The experiences that I had. So my dad, basically, I'm going to try to give you kind of the nuts and bolts here, just kind of the fact. Here's the facts, ma'am. But my dad was arrested, and we'll talk more about that later, the actual arrest, but my dad was arrested in 1992. In the summertime. And basically, he was arrested for financial crimes. He was involved in financial fraud to the tune of maybe several $100,000 is what it amounted to. So he was arrested. He spent about a year waiting for his trial. And in, I think, the summer of 1993, he was tried and he was found guilty, and he was sentenced to initially 8 years in prison. He ended up serving 4. He started off, I think, actually I know because I went and visited him there, but he started in Leavenworth prison, the famous Fort Leavenworth. He was in Leavenworth, Kansas at the prison there for a short time. And then he was transferred to the big facility in El Reno, Oklahoma, which is west of Oklahoma City a ways. And he spent most of his time there. I visited him in prison probably 4 or 5 times, maybe. And that was always wonderful. And
Can't imagine. Imagine.
Really a great experience for a teenager. And then my dad was released in 1997. And in the again spring, I think it was summer of '97, if I'm not mistaken, which was the same summer that I finished high school and was getting ready to go to college. And Joel, it was a it's hard to compare it to people who haven't had that experience. So that's the experience that I had. But just to say that it was a very, very difficult time. Again, the arrest, which we'll circle back to, but there's the experience of the shame of having a parent who is in prison. There's experience of having a parent who can basically no longer provide. So one of the things that was part of this experience that's, I think, unique and worth talking about, because very, very few people ever have this experience. I grew up until this happened with my dad, which was about age 13. My first 13 years of life were basically lived in a middle to upper middle class. In fact, I think almost all of my life was upper middle class lifestyle. Nice vacations, overseas vacations, big houses, nice cars. We didn't lack for anything. We ate good food.
Sure.
Again, we lived in good neighborhoods. I remember riding my bike to a country club in the summer when I was 10 years old in Colorado Springs. All of it, all the trappings. We were insulated from so many of the things that people who are in the lower classes are exposed to. And then when I was 13 and my dad left for prison, we were not set up financially. He wasn't able to contribute anything. And my mom, who had been a 20-year housewife, basically, she had to go and try to earn an income. She had never finished college. And so she bravely went back into the workforce and struggled to basically put food on the table. I basically would eat for about basically almost all of high school. I would eat kind of a basic cereal breakfast most days, school lunches. Another thing about that, I would go in once a week and I would get a little lunch ticket. And that lunch ticket I would pull out when I was paying for my meal, and I get to show everybody who is in line around me that I was poor, basically. So I had a nice little lunch ticket for a reduced price lunch. I think it ended up being like $1 for lunch, and those were as healthy as a school lunch can be. And then for dinner, there were a lot of nights, Joel. I mean, I did not come home to a home cooked meal because my mom was working full time, and also because we barely had enough money. So some nights it was buttered noodles, some nights it was grilled cheese sandwiches with tomato soup. I don't remember having nights where I didn't eat anything, but it was very slim pickings some nights, and I had to just take advantage of eating breakfast and lunch because dinners were not much to speak of. So that was a part of it, right? We lost the breadwinner in the household. The government decided that because of the crimes that my dad committed, it was going to be better for him to leave the household and not provide for us anymore, and for us to then experience poverty. So that was kind of the collateral damage that we faced. So that's something we can talk about more, but that was something that I experienced. Was my dad did these things to, he broke the law and he hurt people. He hurt people by basically promising them he was going to do one thing with their money, and he did something entirely different. People invested a lot of money. They never got anything back. That's bad. But in addition to that, what also happened is the American taxpayer got to fund his prison stay, his trial, everything involved with the FBI doing, pursuing him and all that sort of thing. And then we lost a father in the home, and we know how well fatherless homes do in this day and age, and what the statistics are there for all kinds of bad outcomes. But we didn't have a father in the home. We didn't have a breadwinner. And so we had a very, very different lifestyle in my high school days than previously. So that was some of what we experienced. I mean, the joys of going down and driving, 4 hours to El Reno with my sister. I did that several times with my sister, I think once or twice with my brother. I went to Leavenworth once, and you go and see your dad, and he's in his denims, and you spend a couple hours with him talking awkwardly as you try to ask him questions about what's going on. And there are certain things he will share and other things that he won't. You ask him certain kinds of questions and, get an answer because that the stories that he is withholding are painful. And so it was that was basically more or less the experience that I had. It was challenging. One thing that I'll say I'm very, very thankful for to this day A couple things. One, that I had a mother who stepped up big time, a sister who stepped up big time. I had proxy male role models in my life, which is wonderful. And I don't remember, as difficult as school can be, I don't remember one single person at my school ever saying a thing
Uh-huh.
about my dad being in prison. Now, I wasn't a small guy, and that may be some of the reason why people didn't bother me about it. But I also I feel really grateful in retrospect. Didn't think about it at the time, but in retrospect, seeing that I wasn't bullied about that was really, really quite impressive. So
Yeah.
that's some of the story. I'm sure I'm leaving out some of it, some of the things, and maybe you can probe deeper if you want. But that's roughly a rough sketch of kind of what the experience was like.
Yeah, I was just telling my wife about this. She was asking me about the podcast we're recording, and I was like, yeah, Trent's going to share a personal story. And I gave her a little bit of the thumbnail sketch that you just told everyone. And she just looked at me like with wide eyes, like, what? I had no idea that Trent
Yeah.
experienced like that swing from prosperity to poverty, and how jarring that would be, not just in terms of relationally, the family dynamics, but now the in- exponentially increased stress that is being put on your mom, and now you guys, and you're feeling it, and you're having to make this dramatic change. It's just it's a lot to ask of people, and I love that you shared some of the positives, that you weren't bullied about that. I wish that was everyone's experience. Sadly is not. There are some people whose I've heard whose parents are in prison, and it was extreme shame and bullying around
Hmm.
that kind of stuff. But I
Yeah.
wanted to share a brief story with you, and really get into talking about prisons in general. The reason I think it's important that you share this is that we're not talking from a place of just abstract observations. We have experiences, and you have a very personal experience to speak to this topic that impacts a lot of our society and has ripple effects throughout our society. And I think it's important to zoom out, as I did in the beginning, to let people know the way we do it here in America is seismically fucked up. It is not how every country does it, and the ways we do it, for whatever reason, we keep doing despite the bad outcomes of them, and we'll get into that.
Mm-hmm.
Just real briefly, I wanted to share a story. When I was a pastor, I think this was maybe 2012. I had this random letter got sent to me, and it ended up being a man in prison. I'm going to call him Randy, and I ended up writing back letters with him back and forth for 8 years. And so it was pretty cool. I learned a lot about him. I got to meet him a couple times. He got out one time. I don't know if he was out on parole. At the time, he was super paranoid. He ended up going back to prison because he thought some gangs were out to get him. I don't really remember why he thought that, but that I began to really see what prison does to someone's psychology. He went to prison for something drug related. I don't remember what it was, but he just got caught up in the system, man. I would send him money every now and again through a third party system that created a credit that they could then use at some sort of store. He would always buy like a Walkman with a radio ability, so he could listen to these Christian TV, radio shows on his Walkman.
Mm-hmm.
And I was saying, man, I'll help you do that, right? And I did that
Mm-hmm.
probably
Mm-hmm.
3 or 4 times.
Mm.
Um, but he, one thing that was really interesting, when he went into jail, he had a tattoo on his arm, and it was like, remember Garfield, the cartoon cat?
Yes.
It's Garfield, the cartoon cat, and there was like 4 letters that would like stood for something for him personally, and it just like, don't give a fuck what people think. It was something like that. I don't remember what it was.
Mm-hmm.
It was something he made up, and it was
Mm-hmm.
4 letters that had dots next to them. Well, somewhere like 10 years after he was in prison, there was a Hispanic gang that used those 4 letters for their name, and it
Mm.
got red flagged, basically. This is a Hispanic gang that was dangerous in Dallas. He's an old white man who's been in jail, who's probably older than all of those gang members, right? He
Mm-hmm.
was probably,
Mm.
he was in jail before they were born. Whatever reason, the red flag caught him and put him in the danger zone, and they put him in isolated confinement he was in there for like 4 years that I was writing back and forth with him. And it was just so bizarre, just hearing his perspective. He's the one who said to me, the prison guards are just criminals who haven't been caught yet. I was just like, wow, what a statement. But he was just like, we're all kind of the same. It's just a rough life in a lot of these prisons. So I wanted to share that, just a little bit of my experience, but what are your thoughts, Trent? I know you have many about the American prison system, and are there better ways for a society to address criminal behavior?
Yes, is the answer to that. My thoughts on the American prison system. I mean, I agree with you. I think it's I think the phrase you use is seismically fucked up. I mean, I think that, first of all, I don't think that the general public is really engaged with what we're doing. I mean, we basically, when someone commits a crime, they go and they're found guilty or innocent, and after that, they're sent off to prison. And
unless you're Donald Trump.
Exactly. Right. A lot of people. That's a whole topic we can do a podcast on. Is your financial setup and how well you do at trial. But what is it in Shawshank Redemption where the warden says where Andy Dufresne is trying to get a library built, and he's like, it's not going to happen. The taxpayer, at the end of the day, the warden says something like, taxpayer just wants bigger walls and stronger locks, or something along those lines. And that's kind of what people want, is lock them up, throw away the key. I don't think there's a lot of intelligent discussion going on. I mean, I don't know how many discussions I've really had with people about the prison system. It's not really a popular topic because it's out of sight, out of mind. But the overarching, I think, feeling and thought that I have about the American prison system is it's mostly focused on the punitive aspect of justice. Let's deliver justice to these people. And when we say that, what we mean is let's even the scale. So they committed this crime, and so they need to suffer for it. They need to, as much suffering as they wrought, they need to experience that as well. So it's mainly focused on the punitive aspect of it. And we design these prisons to be about as heartless, about as sterile, about as soul-crushing as is possible. And we put people in there for all kinds of different crimes, and we put them in an environment in which it's going to be pretty easy for them to become worse people and pretty hard for them to become better people. Now, I think that we can have a discussion about what kind of role retribution has for a person who is the perpetrator of a crime. That might be something. I'm open to that, and I especially think that there should be reference to the victims and the loved ones of the victims of a crime to decide what that can look like. We don't contact. One of the things that, Joel, that's remarkable, Judge, based upon the experience that I had, is not once did the justice system get us really involved. My mom said that basically we were asked, someone, maybe my dad's lawyer, asked us to write letters that were to be read during my dad's sentencing.
Impact letters? Is that what they were?
Something like that, right?
Yeah.
I don't really remember that, but that's probably true. But we weren't really consulted. They didn't talk to us and say, what's going to be the impact on you? What would you like to see happen to your dad? As far as I know, they probably didn't talk to the people that he offended. For all I know, the people that were the victims of his crime would have preferred that he stayed out of prison so my dad could have paid them back. Imagine that, somebody actually making restitution for a financial crime that was not a violent crime. But my dad, who was not a violent criminal, he wasn't physically a threat, was locked up so that he couldn't be contributing to society in a great way. We had to the taxpayer had to fund him in prison, and he couldn't pay people back, and he couldn't be a breadwinner for us. And so all these things, we focus in the American prison system on punishing people rather than rehabilitating them. And my thought is that if we are going to release people back into the public, back as a normal citizen, which I think that in almost all cases, we should. Not all cases. I'd have a discussion about that. But in most cases, we're going to, and we need to let people back into society. And so the only question is, are we doing a good job of that? And the answer is no. We suck at that. Our recidivism rate, last time I checked, was around 2/3. That means 2/3 of people who leave prison are rearrested for another crime, and they go back, which means they're at least there are at least 2 people, and probably more, who are victims of these people. And so we're releasing them back, and they are not ready to get back into society. It's a complex issue. There's probably a dozen or so reasons why this is happening. But you look at other countries that are doing it well. We might talk more about Norway or other countries, but the countries that are doing it well, that have controversial sort of prison experiences for the inmates, have recidivism rates of 15 to 20%. So if we care about results, which apparently we don't in America, then we would try to do different things with our prisons. But all we care about is, let's create a horrific environment that's soul destroying for criminals, because they need to be punished. That's all we think about. And I think that punishment and punitive justice, our demand for that is visceral, it's human, it's natural. But if we want to have an adult discussion and not a pre-adolescent, prepubescent discussion about this, we need to start talking about the outcomes that we're actually looking for, and not this sort of bloodthirsty, John Wick-esque, revenge only sort of, Tarantino-esque revenge.
You killed my dog. Story. I'm gonna murder 1,000 people.
But Joel, that is not tangential to this discussion. These are the movies that are part of the mainstream thinking about prison. Is you did something. Think about fucking Liam Neeson in the movie Taken, where obviously a horrendous thing happened to his daughter, and then he's going to go kill half of Paris to get her back. What are we doing? But we accept it. We love it. I loved it.
Yeah, I enjoy all those movies, but just real quick, you mentioned it. I don't want to go super deep here, but why is the Norwegian prison controversial and effective?
Okay, so I first heard about one of the prisons there probably 5 years ago. I think it's called, I'm going to butcher the pronunciation, but I think it's called Bastøy Prison, B-A-S-T, and the weird O and then Y. And this place is on an island, and it's known for having very sort of being low security, and giving a lot of people, the prisoners, a lot of privileges and access to being outdoors and horseback riding and different kinds of things. So, I watched a short documentary or a portion of a documentary where they had James Conway, who is the now retired superintendent of the Attica Correctional Facility in New York City. And he went over to Norway and went to the Halden prison, which is another famous prison there. And at this prison, they actually have, violent criminals there. But in this prison, people are confined to their rooms. They have rooms that look like it's kind of a college dormitory room. They have a mini fridge. They have a desk. They have a TV. They can go on nice walks in like wooded areas. They have they interact. The guards are trained to sort of interact with them regularly and play games with them. They might play ping pong with them. These kinds of things. They play music. So they're given access to all kinds of privileges and creature comforts that you would never find in an American prison. I think a lot of the guards do not carry firearms. I don't think maybe any of them do. I think that they would have access to resources to restrain an inmate if necessary. But otherwise, it's sort of like a little bit like summer camp with the caveat that they cannot leave.
Yeah,
they don't have constant access to their friends, so there are restrictions. But again, compared to your average American prison, it's very lax. And I remember watching this guy James Conway walking through the prison, and you just saw the look on his face, like, I cannot believe. He said something like, "This has got to be, he says it was prison utopia." Yeah. And he said the only way you could make it more liberal than this is to like give the inmates the keys. And so amazing, and yet. The Halden prison, as I understand it, has a 20% recidivism rate. So they are replacing this bloodthirsty desire for retribution with an adult understanding of the need for rehabilitation and the benefit to society when these people return and they're healed and they're ready to be productive citizens again.
Yep.
I'd like to live there.
Yeah, it frustrates me that there's these stupid stories and everyone makes politics about it. Oh, it's liberal. Why is loving and thoughtful and intelligent liberal? So this is where I hate the liberal conservative dichotomy, because in some ways I am very conservative. I am trying to conserve the past. That's what that comes from. I'm not conservative in these labels. I'm conservative like there are some things I want to conserve from the past. I am liberal or progressive because there are some things I think we should let go from the past and embrace new things that that challenge our old beliefs. Underneath that, James Conway's, is that his name?
James Conway, yeah.
Underneath his assumptions are a river of beliefs about that he's being run by, and he's probably not aware of them, and most people aren't. That's why we're talking about this, folks, is because most people don't, for whatever reason, don't stop and go like, why do we do it that way? What belief do I have that is conjuring these emotions that I'm having about said criminal? So, when I worked, I worked as director of public affairs for the largest provider of mental health services in Dallas County, and so I was forced in essence, because I'm in the public sphere. I'm interacting with elected officials. I was forced to deal with where mental health and prison overlap. Now, I say I worked for the largest provider of mental health services in Dallas County, but that's largely because there's not a lot of prisons inside Dallas County. Texas-wide, the prisons are head and shoulders above all the rest as the largest provider of mental health services in the state. And it's not even close. The largest provider is just a fraction of what the state does through its prisons. So basically what's happening, we're arresting people with police officers who they're not trained to be mental health professionals. They're trained to assume that everyone's going to shoot them at any given point, so that they are very, very firm and confident in their responses of like putting down an individual who seems off. Like, make sure that they are restrained, and then throw them into the systems. And the way our system works, we have jails filled with people who, because they have mental health issues or substance abuse issues, they are in this, apparently we think this shithole is the best place for them to deal with mental health and substance abuse issues. And all we're doing, it just exacerbates all. So we have like tons and tons and tons of money that gets poured into these prison systems to give medical treatment to people that they don't really need to be given in jail. If they were actually in communities, or if they were with some other organizations that had a little bit, power to hold people accountable, these people would be doing way better. We'd be spending less money, and there would be, we wouldn't have people being put back out on the streets who've been severely traumatized by the way we do justice. So with that, I know that's kind of a lot to throw your way, but do you think why do you think, Trent, we as a society are so quick to imprison people? And why do we not see the inefficacy of our policies and procedures?
Yeah. Why are we so quick to imprison people? I think that, again, we have such an impoverished record of dialogue about these issues. In a previous podcast, we talked a little bit about that Native American incident where the man was killed back like in the early 1700s. And the tribe, instead of calling for like capital punishment, they wanted monetary reparations, and they wanted like a ritual apology. But this was a community of people that had been having discussions for hours and hours around the fire, or wherever they were dwelling. They'd had many discussions about this So I think one of the reasons that we are so quick to do is we just don't know anything else to do. We just don't have that. That's just not part of our national discussion. And so, yeah, we're so unsophisticated when we talk about it, and we are so geared towards the revenge narrative. These are the narratives that we have, and Joel, I mean, I think also we don't want to spend time thinking about these things from a holistic perspective. We don't want to. It's everything's so individuated, right? We don't want to take time to think about what were the series of events that led to this harm being done and this crime being committed. What was the context of this? I hear, and I think it's good, but I hear constantly this personal responsibility is sort of like the God that some people worship. Is you're responsible for you, I'm responsible for me, and whatever you do, you're 100% responsible. I'm for personal responsibility. I think it's important if you're going to be successful in life, to be responsible. And when somebody commits a crime, I guess you do have to blame somebody. But a lot of times we don't take time to address the larger context within which, what kind of childhood does this person have? What were his parents like? Where did she go to school? All these kinds of influence. That doesn't mean this person shouldn't face consequences, but the only thing we can think to do is, you committed a crime, now you're going to prison. Instead of, what about some of the culpability belonging to the community that this person came from? That's a novel idea. I'm not saying let's go ship all those people out to prison, but what if your community, your school, your neighborhood, your workplace took responsibility a little bit as well to say, what? Now, this is a radical thing to say. I feel even weird saying it, because our only way of thinking, Joel, is what did the individual do? Yeah. But that's the only way we can think about it, addressing the problem is, you did wrong, now you got to go sort of, I love how they say, pay the price. And when somebody is released from 20 years of being in prison, they've just paid for their crime. How do you, unless you've committed a financial crime, how do you pay for your crime?
Correct.
Yeah. I don't understand it. But you also asked, how do we see the inefficacy of our policies and procedures? I mean, this is, about this, but I mean, there are a lot of vested interests in the prison industrial complex. There's a lot of people out there who want to keep it going. I mean, if we started really talking about how we need to release some people who were in prison for minor drug crimes, we need to maybe release people who aren't violent criminals, and we reduced our prison. I mean, can you imagine, Joel, what would happen if we cut the number of prison cells that we had in this country by at least half? I mean, because then all we know how to talk about in America is jobs, 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 jobs. Well, if there's 1 million people employed in the prison system in America, those would be 500,000 people who don't have jobs now. And that's something that we can't handle. We can't have people without jobs, regardless how fucking unnecessary and dipshittery they are. Yeah. Like, we just can't imagine liberating all these people because the prisons would go out. There's a lot of, I mean, when you talk about prison reform, you're going to have to contend with the, what's it called? The union, basically the prison staff unions. I forget the exact term, but these unions are going to lobby against that because they're all going to lose their jobs if we have prison reform. That's why a lot of things never get reformed.
Yep. But I mean, to me, I'm just like, we live in this quote unquote free market. This is my conservative friends. Let the free market take care of the slack. I was like, great, do that, because there's a lot of slack, and they look like people who have been in the status quo for centuries or for decades. I bet if a bunch of crews coming out of these prisons could create a construction company that would be more efficient and cheaper than all these bozos that are trying to rebuild all our highways in Texas. So I agree. I'm just, we're inconsistent with our views on these things. I do agree with you that there is a bloodthirst inside of us, and it's sad to me. I feel very sad that we as a country, as a culture, as a society, haven't allowed, and I'm just going to go to my pastoring kind of side here in theology, which I know you know as well, that we really haven't digested the teachings of Jesus. We have all these buildings with crosses on them. We have all these people claiming to like check these doctrines of belief, but they really haven't digested Jesus's teachings in terms of this. Jesus was quite radical in the way that he pushed against our need for justice or vengeance. I mean, just read the Sermon on the Mount, love your enemies, turn the other cheek. These kinds of teachings, to me, are what move the human species forward, evolving. We need better people to make a better society. And the problem is we can't make a better society unless we have better people. And if people are holding on to these adolescent views of vengeance and not willing to even take the blinders off, then just consider that there's other ways to do this that accomplish the same goal of consequences, but we can do this in a way that doesn't satisfy our ego's need to just like put people in the corner and go like, I'm better than you because I didn't like steal some TVs or whatever it may be. I think about Portugal, who decriminalized drugs. This is quite well known. I don't hear it talked about a ton, but in 2001 they decriminalized all like possession and selling of drugs, and this was largely because they were known as like the heroin capital of Europe because of all their ports, and they were having some pretty significant issues. Most recently, some of their data and stats have plateaued, largely because they've decreased funding for a lot of these things. But when in 2000, so here it is, 1999, Portugal was known as the heroin capital of Europe. So they had to deal with multiple issues of all these people who are addicted, all the weight on their prison systems, the weight on their law enforcement. I mean, all these costs just begin to add up. So they decriminalized drugs and focused on what's called harm reduction, which I learned a lot about when I was at the mental health clinic that focused a lot on substance abuse. It's common sense. Actually, instead of just putting these people in prison, what can we do to reduce harm? This looks like having places to get new needles for drugs so that HIV isn't passed around. This looks like having funded programs that help people recover from addiction and really understand why they turn to addiction, which is usually childhood trauma. You have all these different kinds of things that are meant to reduce the harm, to reduce the amount of people who are dying from drug overdose and things of that nature. So 2001, they focused on harm reduction. By 2018, they dropped from 100,000 people addicted to heroin to 25,000. I would say that worked. HIV infection from drug use injections dropped 90%. And the health costs alone for drug-related medical treatment was cut by 18%. So in all fronts, it paid dividends to their society. Now, people in politics over time will begin to say, we shouldn't do that as much. So they started lowering the cost because they're focused on other things, because we as human beings, we are not wise as a species, at least not yet. We're just not. Collectively, we're still pretty infantile in the way that we think. We're very reactionary. Politics knows this well. If they want to get into positions of power, they don't like go after my wisdom. They go after my reactions. That's how they get their votes. And so that's why I think, Portugal seeing some swing in that direction. They were desperate to try something new. It worked. And now they're kind of like decreasing some of their funding there. So Trent, with that story being said and some of my thoughts here, what should our goal be when we are creating prison systems and policies of justice?
Yeah, I think it's twofold. I mean, I think one, justice includes a response to what a victim and the victim's loved ones have suffered. That has to be addressed. And whatever that might look like, if that involves some measure of punitive justice, I don't think that when somebody commits a crime that they should have an easy time, or that they should go get daily massages at a Four Seasons-esque resort. I don't think that that's appropriate. So I think that the concerns of those who have been victimized should be addressed. Now, but this, and then I'll get to this. The second one would be helping inmates heal and reform, which I'll come back to. But the first is, when there are victims of a crime, one of the questions that should be asked is there something that the perpetrator can do to repair the harm that they've done? Now, in the case of certain kinds of crimes, rape, murder, assault, there may not be much that they could do or should do. The best thing that they need to do is be forever out of this person's life. Okay.
Yeah.
But in other kinds of situations, defacement of public property, theft, armed robbery, financial fraudulent behavior,
Drug possession,
slander, libel, all kinds. These are things that there is space for reparation to take place. And that's just not even on our radar screen for whatever reason. The legislature has decided not to make that a priority. And then the judges, when they're making sentences, most judges, almost all judges, don't integrate. Some crazy radical justices will do some creative things with their sentencing, but most of the time, just get out of here and go to jail. That's all.
Yeah.
That's all we care about. So my dad was deprived of the opportunity, because he was sent to prison, to work creatively. Maybe the victims would have said, you know what we want? We want you to pay back a portion of what you've stolen from us, and we want you to take your knowledge of the financial system, and we want you to go down to the local boys club or whatever it is. We want you to teach financial literacy or something like that.
Yeah.
God forbid a healing, wonderful story like that.
Yeah, I know.
God forbid that happen. God forbid we would do something that's beautiful and wonderful and so then the second part is, one of the goals is helping inmates heal and reform. Now, if somebody commits a crime, we could do one of two things. Somebody commits a crime, doesn't matter what the crime is, prison for life, or we just kill them, right? That would be one way to deal with it. Not the best solution. The other is, if we're going to release some of these people back into the world, right? Let them out of prison and back to normal society. We have an obligation and a responsibility to society to make sure that they don't harm people again as much as we're able to do that. We can't guarantee anything, but that means creating an environment in prison where these people are treated like human beings who have done something wrong and are on the fucking road to recovery.
Yeah.
So reasonably humane environments without being overly indulgent, and access to the kinds of resources that are going to help them reintegrate in a positive way. And why don't we then also stop stigmatizing for life people who have committed crimes, and think of them as people who did a horrible thing, and there's multiple reasons for it, and now they are looking for a chance to get back into society and make it right by changing their ways. And so I think it's finding justice, true justice for victims, and I think it's helping inmates heal and reform.
Well said. I am impressed with your views on that. I did want to call out a link that I shared with you. I think it's prisonpolicy.org, and they had a report for the 2024 looking at the whole view of the prison system. And what I liked about them is they didn't have like any black and white answers.
Yes.
And they talked about how complex so much of this is. And if we want to really get to the root, if we really want to bring solutions, we have to get to the root of some of these issues. But they had several myths on there I wanted to call out. And one of them was that people in prison for violent and sexual crimes are too dangerous to be released. all the data shows, and this is very reliable, nonpartisan kinds of data that we get to track, people who are arrested for violent and sexual crimes are the least likely to get rearrested.
Mm.
And I'm sure there's a myriad of hypotheses about why that is, but this idea that if you commit a certain kind of crime that you shouldn't be released again is not upheld by data. I have a friend who was put into prison because he committed a sexual crime when he was younger, and older. He had a family and everything, but he still had to go back to his parole officer as a registered sex offender. He moved into a new neighborhood. They sent out letters with his picture to all the neighbors, so everyone knew. It was just like, wow. There are times when I think that is relevant. There are people that we should be aware of. I want to know, but the way that we go about doing these things is so dehumanizing, and not very well thought out, in my opinion. Another one of the myths that they point out is they talked about harsh punishments deter crimes. There is zero data from the history of America that any kinds of harsh punishments have any direct correlation to crime dropping. There's no evidence for that. And that's where I began to just ask the question, do we care about what's true, or do we care about our egos need to be right? And functionally, I think we as a society are egoic nation. America is as egoic as I can think. We're not the only egoic nation. There's many. But I find us to be a society that's still spiritually immature. And we have not yet come to grips with what you used, the story of your dad. Like, what if they did this? It's beautiful and it's healing. And what if we created more of those? And it makes me so sad that we don't seem to be interested in that. And I just want to kind of wrap things up here, Trent, because, we talked a lot about these prison systems, and you've told me and our viewers and listeners about your perspectives of your personal life. I can't help but wonder if our prison systems are just basically propping up the worst parts of human beings. Like, they are almost a manifestation of the darkest parts of who we are. Egos, insecurities, vengeance, power trips. Bring us home. Can you share with us some final thoughts of how all of this personally affected you?
Yeah, it's forever shaped me, Joel. It in my whole experience with it, from the economic side to visiting my dad in prison, it has shaped me. It has shaped my political views, my theological views, my social views. It has been very, very impactful. And I think I'm still working through some of the anger that I have towards the system and towards individuals involved. And another story I think is worth sharing, probably the most painful moment of the whole thing was my dad was the crimes that he was eventually sentenced for were probably committed, I think, in the late 80s when he was running a business in Colorado Springs. He was eventually arrested in Springfield, Missouri. For some reason, it took years to, I guess, build a case. But the story goes that my dad had been somewhat uncooperative, I guess, with the FBI. It's not a shocker to me knowing my dad, but he was, I think, being tracked by the FBI. They pretty much knew his whereabouts. He had left the country to go to South Africa to do business and probably be off their radar screen. I remember he would travel back and forth to South Africa, which is where he grew up. And he eventually came back. He came back on one occasion around Christmas time, my 7th grade year. And that's when I think my mom started noticing that maybe our phone was being tapped. Like, I think the FBI was listening to our conversations to try to get information on my dad. I think that she heard sounds, maybe.
Interesting.
Yeah, something like that. But remember, so this was interesting. She talked to my dad's attorney and said, I think our phone's being tapped. And he said to her, you know what he said? What, do you have anything to hide?
Oh,
that's what he said to her, my dad's attorney. as if, yeah, everyone should have their phone tapped. It's no problem. We all want to have FBI agents listening to whatever our conversation might be.
We're in
Privacy
a free
doesn't
country, my
matter.
friend.
Yeah, this was pre-Patriot Act, you know?
Oh,
One
wow.
of the great conservative achievements is listening into our phones. And so you shouldn't have anything to hide. So anyway, that was wonderful. And then fast forward to my brother's high school graduation, 1992. My brother had gotten to the student center at Missouri State University where they were having it. My sister and I believe, went with my dad, and my mom came separately. So we drove over to the student center, and we were walking in. We walked into the main lobby. And as we were walking in, the three of us, two gentlemen in suits walked up to me, and they said, "Is this your dad, Bruce Hunter, right here?" And I said, "Yes, that's him." And they proceeded to arrest him in the lobby of the student center at my brother's high school graduation. My sister and I mean, my memory there is just hazy, but it's one of chaos and fear and anxiety and anger and all these kinds of things. So we're just scrambling, trying to figure out what was going on. One of a attorney / friend came over to see if the police officers and FBI agents would allow my dad to be there for the high school graduation, and they could take him afterwards. And they said that was not going to happen. My brother found out about it. He flew into a rage. He came up, understandably, flew into a rage and came up and basically started confronting the police officers, and more or less was told, if you don't calm down, you're gonna be next. So there was that. I just remember the sight of my dad ran outside. I remember seeing him being escorted out by FBI agents and police officers, and and then it was he was held in jail for maybe a day or two until his bail was posted, and then he was released, and then he spent like a year in Tulsa. But Joel, that was such a it was such a brutal experience. Because
why do you think they didn't go to your house?
I don't. So I'll tell you. So I wondered. There were so many other places where they could have arrested him. Sure. They knew exactly where he was. They could have arrested him in other places that would not have been embarrassing to all of us. But here's what happened. I later discovered my mom had a friend who was at church, and at his church was one of the FBI agents. My mom's friend came to find out that one of the guys who arrested my dad was going to church with him. And so my mom's friend said to him one day, he knew the whole story, and he asked the FBI agent, "Why did you decide to arrest him there at my brother's graduation? Why did you do it there?" He's like, "Well, Bruce had been such a thorn in our side that we were just fed up. We wanted to embarrass him. We wanted to make an example of him." Can you imagine?
Make an example.
An FBI agent who ostensibly signed up to do that job because they thought they were becoming a public servant. And they decided, because their egos had been hurt somewhere along. I don't deny that my dad had probably made them upset. They decided in that moment they were going to ruin my brother's high school graduation and traumatize all of my dad, all of the family. They decided that they didn't care about that. Yeah. They didn't care at all. And they were willing to do that. And, I was just like, that whole process. Then my dad going and being sentenced, and not one time are we consulted about what we want to have happen, whether it matters if we want to lose a breadwinner, all of this. It was all so impersonal and bureaucratic and mechanical, and it was so inhumane and removed that they even came up, and I was 13 years old, and they came up to me and asked me if that was my dad for whatever reason, and then arrested him. I mean, what are you doing? Probably went out afterwards, had a cigarette and a beer, and laughed about it. Yep. I would just love to sit down with those two FBI agents and say, "Can you guys look me straight in the eye? I want you to look me in the eye right now. And I want you to tell me why you thought it was worth it doing that. And how many other times in your fucking FBI career have you behaved in such a way and you wonder why you have the reputation in law enforcement that you do?" because you get this gun on your fucking side and you think you win every argument because of it, and you're fucking lower than a goddamn worm and gutter trash. You're a piece of shit. And you
You're
need
not
to
the good
stop
guys.
doing that. Just because you have a gun on your side doesn't mean you get to be an asshole, and it doesn't mean you win arguments. And there's a lot of people in law enforcement who are out there who are serving and trying to do the right thing, and you fucking ruin it for all of them because you decided it would be funny to be an asshole at this thing. It was premeditated. It wasn't in the moment. You sat in your FBI cars and you knew what you were doing as you went into this thing. You were going to arrest him in a public place. I don't understand it, but this is where the
Can I stop you real quick
frustration.
there?
Yeah.
You said you don't understand it. I think you do understand it.
All too well. All too well.
It's because we live in a society that won't hold certain people accountable. Our law enforcement and our justice system, it plays into the hands of human egos.
Mm-hmm.
I sometimes don't think that. I think that probably a lot of people get into law enforcement or FBI work, whatever, out of really pure motives.
Mm-hmm.
But when you're given that kind of power without the training and what really is probably emotional intelligence and like spiritual development, that I am actually not better than anyone. There aren't good guys and bad guys. There are people who have badges and people who don't. There are just as many criminals who have badges. You know what I mean? It's just when you're looking at percentages of populations, we're human beings. So I think that what often happens in when I got super angry hearing your story, by the way. I just want to take both those guys and use jujitsu moves that I don't actually know. But
well, Joel, imagine again. I talked about another picture that would be beautiful. Can you imagine if those FBI agents, rather than coming to the graduation, would have, let's say, allowed the graduation to happen, and then they came to the house afterwards, the two FBI agents and a mental health professional trained to talk to the people who are left after the dad is gone, who could have, the FBI agents arrest him, and then there's another person there to sit us down and say, hey, here's what's happening. What do you guys need? And here's what we're going to make available to you as the state for helping you guys through the process of having a parent go to prison. Or even if that didn't happen, can you imagine if the FBI agent came up to me and said, hey, listen, while they're arresting my dad, one of them came over because they had police there too, but another FBI agent come sit us down and say, listen, this is a terrible thing. I'm really sorry you're having to see this. We're going to help provide. We didn't get a single goddamn resource provided to us for processing that event. We were probably, they would have said, well, your local church should handle that. You know, that's what the community, the government shouldn't be paid for that sort of thing. That's what churches are for. Well, I can assure you that our church, I mean, I did have a pastor come and visit, but there were people who were trained to handle that situation and to try to help us to process that.
Yeah.
I mean, what are we doing? So a major missed opportunity in this for this moment where, yes, okay, I could have accepted that my dad had committed a crime and needed to go away for a while. I can accept that, but I need to be helped with that process. And there was nothing. There was nothing for it. So, yeah.
I just feel a lot of sadness for you, my friend, in terms of what you had to go through, but I do see how that has shaped you, and in terms of your views on society, your views on what does compassion look like. And I think those are the kinds of convictions that make our world a better place. Mm-hmm. When people go through these liminal spaces or these very like crucibles, so to speak, a lot of times people come out with bitterness, but maybe more often than not, people come out on the end with wisdom and perspectives that we need in terms of making better policies, better practices. And I hope that the seed we're planting for our listeners is the way we do things isn't necessarily the best way. In fact, all the data shows it isn't even accomplishing our goal of rehabilitation. If our goal is rehabilitation, we have failed in every measurable metric. If our goal is vengeance and making our society slowly worse and worse over time, I think there's a strong argument to make that we're A-plussers.
Yeah. Well, Joel, I mean, let me throw this in too, because I've been in some ways talking a big game, but you know, those FBI agents hurt us that day. And what they did wasn't a crime, but it was a harm. And I've listened to a lady named Miriam Kaba talk about harm and crime and how that needs to be part of the discussion. Some crimes are harms. Not all crimes are harms, and not all harms are crimes. So they committed a harm, but it wasn't a crime. It wasn't illegal to do what they did, but it was a harm. But I tell you one thing. I tell you what. We talked about like the visceral nature. Viscerally, I want to beat the shit out of those guys. I do.
Yeah.
But you know what I really want? I'd love to sit down with those guys, tell my story, hear their story, and let them have an opportunity to say, you know what, Trent, I'd never really thought about what it did to you. And now seeing you and being in front of you, I feel horrible because I'm a normal human being. I acquired some calluses, but I feel terrible. And I want you to let you know that I own that, what I did, and I feel really, really bad about it. God forbid, I might even become friends with that fucking guy. I might go get a goddamn beer with him. But because the way it was handled, I'll probably never have that chance. But that is the kind of thing I'm talking about. Is I have feelings, I have anger, but I would much rather have reparation and reconciliation with that motherfucker. And if you're out there, if you ever fucking hear this, you'll know how to find me. leadballoonspodcast@gmail.com. You can look me up. There's a 1 in a million chance. If you want to talk to me, you know where to find me.
Come on. Maybe we'll catch some of those algorithms on YouTube and we'll get some more listeners. Man, thanks for sharing that. That's so beautiful. Yeah, friends. Man. Trent just shared our email. Please reach out to us. Let us know some topics you want us to discuss. We'd love to hear that. leadballoonspodcast@gmail.com. You can go to our website, leadballoonspod.com. That has it's kind of our landing page, has all the little icons you can push for audio and video platforms that we've pushed out to. We have some blogs there you can check out. But in the meantime, Trent, my friend, thank you so much for bringing your vulnerable and authentic self to this discussion.
Sure. Of course.
All right, friends, this is our signing off. Lead Balloons, the alchemy of unpopular opinions. Thank you so much for tuning in.